It's Sunday, March 22nd, and it's the fifth consecutive day that I'll be uploading videos here on YouTube, which is probably a record for me. I'm also approaching 800 subscribers, which is definitely a record for me. I hope you continue to enjoy what I'm doing to help pass the time and maybe to hopefully help you pass the time as well. Today, as I said in yesterday's video, I would be talking a little bit about my ham radio hobby. A few correspondents have written in and wanted to see what I had for equipment. Some people have relatives who are ham radio operators, and some are ham radio operators themselves, actually. So they wanted to see what I have here in the shack, and it's my pleasure to give you a quick tour. My main radio nowadays is this ICOM IC7300, which I got around 2 years ago. It's been a fantastic radio. Had a lot of fun with it. It allows me to use Morse code and voice to contact people basically all around the world. I can also use data modes by hooking the radio up to one or the other of my computers here. I can put data into my radio signal and have it go to the other side of the contact, and then the person at the other side decodes the data into their computer, so we can have basically a text-based conversation over the air. I have Morse code here. I have my Morse code keyer, so I thought I'd give you a quick demonstration of me doing some Morse code. So with this Morse code keyer, what I can do is use this paddle here to send the dits, and this paddle on this side to send the dashes. So if I were to send out the word bencher, for instance, which is the manufacturer of this particular set of paddles, it's a bencher paddle, I would do it like this. That's bencher in Morse code. Now my IC7300 is connected to an LDG antenna tuner, which allows me to adapt the radio to single antennas or multiband antennas without having to select different antennas outside. I don't have that many antennas outside, so I have to use one antenna for many different things. The antenna tuner allows me to configure the radio so it'll work with that antenna on many different frequencies. Right now I'm currently set up on what we call the 15-meter band, or 21 megahertz. Right now there's nobody else on the band. I won't say there's no one else there. They could be there, but I can't hear them. A, because my antenna's not that great, but mostly because the band isn't open right now. There's not enough solar activity to energize the ionosphere to enable it to reflect or refract signals on that frequency spectrum range. So what happens from here, of course, well, obviously we need an antenna. The antenna tuner is connected to 3 ports, actually. This one talks to the radio, and the radio can command the tuner to do things. This particular cable goes to my antenna switch, and this cable goes to the radio itself. The antenna switch is found over here. And basically, I know there's lots of wires in the way. That's what ham shacks are like. They have lots of wires. The antenna switch allows me to switch between up to 5 different antennas. I only happen to have 2 antennas hooked up to the switch right now. So there's one for 6 meters, and there's one for the high frequency bands, or which we call HF. And the antenna switch allows me to select from different antennas that are outside. The other end of the antenna switch is connected to a box, and that box is out here. I'm now outside. The box is right behind me here, and it allows the antenna switch inside to pick from different inputs that are here on the outside. As you can see, there are up to 5 different inputs where I can put different antennas and have one cable coming back into the house where my radio's hooked up. That prevents me from having to put 5 different cables into the house. Now, outside I actually have 2 antennas on the go, as I mentioned just a minute ago. There's the HF antenna, which is just a piece of wire that goes out through the backyard here. And it actually broke a couple of weeks ago, and I kind of fixed it, but it's not really properly fixed. I probably won't get it properly fixed until spring comes, the weather's a little better, and I can get out and spend some time with a soldering iron and properly connect that wire back together, rather than just the way I've got it twisted right now. The other antenna I have, basically a rectangular thing that works on the 6-meter VHF band. So I can switch from one of those antennas to the other, even though they're outside, without me having to go outside to do it. I just use that little clicky switch box in here. And if I wanted to add up to 3 more antennas, All I need to do is connect them to that box outside, and then I have them available in here. So that's pretty cool. Over the years, I've had a lot of fun with ham radio. I got first licensed in 1984, so that's, wow, 36 years ago, or it will be on the 1st of April. April Fool's Day was when I wrote my exam in 1984, which says something, I guess. Anyway, that's going to be an interesting anniversary for me. 36 years of doing anything is probably a long time. In times like this, when we have the coronavirus raging out there, ham radio is completely unaffected. You can sit here and talk to people all around the world just like you did before. The virus doesn't go through the radio waves, so it's an entirely safe activity. Over the years, I've done some things from operating on the high-frequency bands on shortwave inside. I've also done some outside operating where I go out with an antenna in my hand and one or two radios talking on that. And with that setup, I've talked to satellites in space, and several times, multiple times, I've talked to the International Space Station, the former Soviet space station called Mir before the ISS was launched, and also talked to two space shuttles, the Atlantis and the Discovery, I believe. I've got them all logged in my logbook. Most of these contacts happened in the 1980s and 1990s, although the space station contacts happened in the early 2000s. The astronauts are still up there. They still have ham radio equipment up there, but they're just a lot busier these days, and they're not as easy to find when they go overhead on a pass. I used to go out just randomly waiting to see if they'd be on the air, and I got really lucky several times. They were on the air, and I would talk to them just from with a little walkie-talkie radio in my backyard or sitting in my vehicle, or sometimes even in the house here. So it's been a lot of fun. That's really what got me into ham radio in the first place, was the chance to talk to astronauts. The minute I heard the first astronaut in space, his name was Owen Garriott. His call sign was W5LFL. I was hooked. One of the chief engineers at the radio station where I worked, Don Weeks, he had talked to him one evening and made a tape of that conversation and came in, and I came in for my shift at the radio station. He says, "I want you to hear something." So I went into the room when he put the tape on, and I heard him talking to this astronaut, to Owen. And that was it. Okay, if I can talk to an astronaut, I'm going to get my license now. I was always casually interested in ham radio because it's a thing that resonates with me, DNA-wise, I guess. But to have that happen, to be able to talk to an astronaut while the astronaut is in space doing his job or her job is pretty incredible for me, as a geek that I am. I've taught some ham radio courses. I've taken every license exam I can take in North America. I've got both Canadian certifications. I have my basic amateur and my advanced amateur, which is the highest license you can get. I have my Morse code endorsement. In fact, back when I first got my license, you had to know Morse code, at least 10 words a minute, before they would give you a license for ham radio, because it's a federal government license that you're operating on. And in the United States, back in 2016, it was about 3.5 years ago, I decided I would, while I was at a ham radio event, they had exams going on, and I said, well, why not? For $10, I can go in there and write exams, and I can keep writing exams until I fail. And it turns out I got lucky. I didn't fail, and I wrote all 3 exams in one sitting. I got my technician, my general, and then my extra class license in the United States. So I'm licensed in Canada and the U.S. My call sign here in Canada is VY2HF, which you might have seen in my identities and my Twitter name and all that. In the States, which I don't operate from very often, but I do have a license there, I've acquired the extra class call sign W1PJ. In the United States, any call sign that's only 4 letters long is a bit of a prestigious thing, because you need to be an extra class amateur to hold such a call. Over the years, I've done some interesting modes of propagation, as we call it. The propagation is the act of a radio wave going from one place to another. And the propagation of radio waves in the amateur radio spectrum can happen in many different ways. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's tropospheric, sometimes it's ionospheric. And I think the coolest one of all is bouncing radio waves off of something else. A friend of mine, Bill, he bounces his radio signals off the moon. He has a big antenna array that he points at the moon when it's obviously visible in the sky, and he shoots his signals at that. And then anyone else on the Earth who's equipped similarly to Bill, who can see the moon and their horizon can also communicate with Bill. So they bounce their signals off the moon. So the moon, as you can probably imagine, is visible to half of the Earth at any one time. So Bill has talked to people in Europe and elsewhere in the United States and Canada. Very hard to talk to Australia or Japan because they're so far around the other side of the Earth that the moon is only visible in both locales very rarely. It's not impossible, but it's not easy. And when the moon is visible, it's probably pretty low in the sky. So bouncing off the moon is cool. I'd like to do that sometime, but I don't think I'll ever have the capacity. I won't have the space in my yard, or I won't have the funds even probably to get that kind of equipment. What I do when I can is I try to use the northern lights as a way to bounce my signals. It's not easy. It's very infrequent that this is even available because the northern lights are not that common, especially these days. But when they're there, you can actually point, in this case, that little square rectangular antenna outside. I can point that to the north and resonate my signal into the northern lights. And other people who are pointed north from anywhere in North America, maybe even Europe, if they can hear the northern lights vibrating, essentially with my signal, then they can hear the signal. It doesn't sound really high quality, but it's readable, and we can have conversations using Morse code or voice using the northern lights. And that's pretty cool. So I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of contacts. Back in 1989, when there was a large solar flare, a whole series of large solar flares, I had a lot of fun talking to stations using the Aurora. So that's a little bit of the fun I have with ham radio. Something to do on a rainy day or a day when you otherwise can't get out very much. Hope you're safe and sound wherever you are, and hope you're enjoying your day. If all goes well, I'll be back tomorrow with more of something. Have a great day. Don't touch your face. Wash your hands. Bye.